Following on the heels of Ravnica City Guilds was the first small faction set, Guildpact.
Guildpact released on February 3rd, 2006 and continued, story-wise, where its predecessor, Ravnica City of Guilds, left off, while at the same time having its own unique identity and feel, setting it apart from the block's first set. Guildpact's set symbol is that of a three-pronged wrought iron design meant to evoke the set's three guild setup, as well as the block's overall urban theme. The set's story can be enjoyed by reading Corey Herndon's novel of the same name. And as per usual, here's a quick summary of it all. Decades before Ravnica's decamillennial, a member of the Izzet Guild flies over a zone within the plain-spanning city, known as Utvara. He attempts to activate an explosive of sorts above a plague-ridden zone within in order to cleanse the area and kill all life within while keeping the structures intact. The zone's native Gruul, however, attack and bring the aircraft down. Rather than exploding, however, the device implodes, killing all of the Gruul in the area and creating a strange fold in space that begins absorbing the ghosts of all who die there. Fast forward to 12 years after the decamillennial, Teysa Karlov is pulled from her job within the Orzhov Syndicate by her uncle to help him with the redevelopment of Utvara, land which he owns outright. In exchange, she becomes the area's Baroness until her uncle dies, upon which time he will assume his place on Orzhov's ruling body, the Ghost Council. She, along with her uncle, his right-hand man, Melisk, and an Izzet courier named Crix, are venturing through the zone destined for a location known as Cauldron, where an Izzet mage lord named Zomaj Hawk lives and works. Meanwhile, a Gruul bandit named Yum is laying in wait and plans to attack the transport they are riding. But Yum meets an untimely end thanks to an invisible assailant, only for his body to, somehow, get right back up again. During their journey, Uncle reveals that many years ago he had hired Hawk to have a bomb dropped in Utvara to destroy all life in the zone, including the plague, thus allowing redevelopment to begin sooner rather than later. That's when the reanimated Yum and his thugs attack the transport. The goblin, Crix, makes an immediate escape but is quickly apprehended by Vorgolazar, a much less bloodthirsty Gruul than Yum and his gang. In another area within Utvara, the imp Pivlik has built himself a new bar, his previous establishment having been destroyed by the now illegal-to-exist Ghostmen. Argus Koz, the retired Wojak lieutenant from the Boros Legion, now works as the club's bouncer. Late in the night, Teysa and Melisk enter the venue, carrying the corpse of her uncle, apparently killed in a Gruul attack. Koz is relieved of his bouncing duties for the night and heads home. On the way, he meets an old Gruul centaur named Trio. Koz tells him that he should warn his people because the Orzhov will probably want revenge for one of the Gruul slaying one of their patriarchs. Trihiro retorts, saying that the man these newcomers had brought to Pivlik's bar was still breathing when they arrived in town. Her uncle now deceased, Teysa, Melisk, and Pivlik perform a ritual to send his ghost to the Ghost Council. Teysa then settles into her new role as the Utvara Baroness. She orders a mansion be built for her within Utvara. She then learns that the large Selesnyan tree in the center of town keeps the plague from entering within its limits, and tasks a local Simic doctor with coming up with a cure for the plague, so that they will not need to rely on the Selesnyan Conclave's help due, in part, to a contract the Orzhovs have with them, stating that they must clean up the zone by a certain deadline, or hand it back to the Selesnyans. Of course, the presence of a 10,000-year-old Yor-Tiller Nephilim in the area isn't helping things. Koz, suffering from anxiety and an aging heart, continues his long-standing search for his angelic ally, Feather, in the Parhelion, the flying fortress in which the City Plains Angels reside. While he does not find them, he does spy the Gruul, Vorgolazar, along with his goblin captive, Crix. The retired lieutenant informs Teysa, who sends he and Pivlik on a rescue mission to free the Izzet courier, seeing it as a way to improve relations with the area's Izzet leadership. Not long after, Koz and Crix's parties converge on one another. Pretty quickly, Koz learns that her Gruul captor was actually her escort, and is taking her to Cauldron to be reunited with her boss, Somaj Hawk. Apparently, the Gruul also want good relations with this Izzet magelord. That's when the combined parties are attacked by the bloodthirsty Jan and his band of goons. They manage their escape, but not before realizing that Jan and his thugs have been zombified. Teysa, meanwhile, goes to see Dr. Nabun, the same Simic doctor she had tasked with developing a cure for the plague. She has been having bouts of narcolepsy and thinks he can help. While there, the doctor informs her that he has had a cure for the plague this whole time, which he sells to Teysa for an amazing sum. Fed up with the headaches she gets every time she's reminded of the Gruul who killed her uncle, she decided to confront her late family member. Well, his ghost upon Orzhov's Obsidian Council anyhow. He agrees to tell her, but only if she swears absolute allegiance to the Obsidian, which she does. He reveals that since suicide is forbidden within the Orzhov, he had his right-hand man, Melisk, mind control her so that she could kill him, thus allowing him to take his place on the council. He then tells his niece of a deal the Obsidian brokered with the Izzet a number of years back, before revealing to her that she doesn't have narcolepsy at all, but rather that Melisk has been off and on controlling her mind for years, abusing her, and wiping her memory of it. The Obsidian return Teysa's memories to her, which infuriates the Baroness. She immediately breaks her oath of the council, swearing to herself she will kill Melisk at the first chance. Now at Cauldron, Koz, Crix, and the rest are taken prisoner by Hawk. He shows them a trio of dragon eggs, and tells them of his plans to use the power of the souls that have been becoming trapped in the schism, the fold in space accidentally created decades prior, to bring them to life, as per the deal the Obsidian made with the Izzet Paran, Niv Mizzet, many years ago. He also tells them that Niv, using the spell that the courier, Crix, has on her, plans on taking control of the dragons to lay waste to civilization, something that is most definitely not part of the deal the Orzhov leadership made with the Izzet. The mutated plague afflicting the area, apparently, is nothing more than a method for making the Ravnican air breathable for ancient dragons, and that he worked with a Simic, Dr. Nabun is specific, on evolving it. He summons Crix to accompany him, then orders the rest killed. Back in the Utvara township, Teysa begins rallying members of all guilds to rise up and form their own allegiance against Cauldron, turning her back on the Obsidian's plans and finding the goings-on there too dangerous to be allowed to proceed. As her ranks grow, she administers a Simic's plague vaccine to all who enlist in her aid. A small army behind her, she marches upon Cauldron, only to be intercepted by Melisk and some 30 Taj, Orzhov ghost assassins who have been possessing Antam and his tribe. Teysa's pure Orzhovian blood allows her to easily consume control of the Taj, and has them tear Melisk limb from limb as retribution for all of the abuse he had caused her over the years. Satisfied, she turns her attention back towards Cauldron. There, Hawk's minions fire up the machines to awaken the ancient dragons. At the same time, Koz, Golazar, Pivlik, and a re-imprisoned Crix attempt a jailbreak, wrecking a number of Hawk's machines in the process. During the chaos, Teysa and her conscript army arrive and join the fray. The Baroness happens upon Pivlik and informs him that the zone's airborne plague is actually so that Hawk's dragons will be able to breathe once they're brought back to life. She inoculates him against its effects and instructs him to vaccinate everyone else, knowing that the Selesnyan tree back in town cannot filter out the pathogens until there are no unvaccinated left to incubate the illness. Just then, a section of the cauldron collapses, crushing one of Hawk's 3 ancient eggs. Before the other 2 eggs can be damaged, however, they hatch. Hawk uses the spell delivered by Crix to take control of one, and immediately rides it towards town, intent on burning down its air-purifying tree. Teysa reads off the spell as well, entrancing the other dragon to do her bidding and sends it after Hawk. Koz and Crix steal Hawk's flying machine and follow. In the plague-filled skies above Utvara, a battle ensues. Hawk disables a stolen flying machine, sending it and its 2 occupants, Koz and Crix, crashing to the ground below. Hawk gets bucked off his dragon mount, however, and is thrown hard against a nearby cliff wall, killing him on impact. The late Mage Lord's dragon then attacks the one controlled by Teysa, both simultaneously dying as they are impaled on the outcropping of a building while they are entangled amongst one another. From the wreckage on the ground, a dying Kos looks up into the sky. From the distance flies a familiar form. It is Feather, his long-lost ally. Heavily, the retired Wojcik lieutenant raises his arm and manages a single wave of his hand before his body, too, retires for good. Many attend the funeral of Argus Kos, including the daughter of his late partner, Fawn, and the Golgari leader, Jared, as the storied, late member of the Boros Legion is laid to rest. Elsewhere, the spirit of Zamaj Hawk awakens, hearing the voices of a vast number of other spirits calling for him. And thus, Guildpact's story comes to a close just in time for Ravnica's 3 final guilds to voice their dissension. Of course, that's not to say there isn't more about Guildpact the set that still has yet to be said.
And I'm going to help tell you about it.
The first of 2 small sets in the original Ravnica block, Guildpact brings 165 cards to the table, including a pair of reprints: Cremate, last seen as an uncommon in Invasion, and Savage Twister, which, at the time, hadn't seen prints since its debut in Mirage. While the set continues the multicolored themes and hybrid mana from Ravnica City of Guilds, it does not build upon the mechanics and abilities of the block's first set as a follow-up set typically does. Rather, it introduces 3 new abilities, which makes sense seeing as Guildpact features 3 of Ravnica's 2-colored guilds that were not featured in City of Guilds. Whereas the first Ravnica set featured 4 guilds, Boros, Selesnya, Dimir, and Golgari, Guildpacts include the Black-White Orzhov Syndicate.
Orzhov takes the organization of white and the crime of black to make the faction that wants to control things through a very systematic manner. And it actually has this religion that it founded as a means to control things around it.
Red-Blue Izzet League.
Izzet takes the thought of blue and the passion of red and combines to make creativity. That it is the guild that is all about seeing what wondrous things you can make and wondrous things you can do. That it is not bounded by what is and searches for what could be.
And Green-Red Gruul clans.
Gruul is the guild that takes the impulse of red and the instinct of green and just is the one that lives in the moment, that does what it's the antithesis of thinking or caring about things ahead of time. It just does what it wants to do. It follows whatever it thinks it does, however it feels, it acts. And that it is really the guild all about being more so than doing.
Each of those guilds, of course, came with their own brand new mechanic. Haunt for Orzhov, which returns a card from the graveyard haunting another permanent in play. When that latter permanent is put in the graveyard, the haunting card's ability triggers. Replicate for Izzet, which puts copies of a given instant or sorcery spell onto the stack dependent on how many times that card's replicate cost is paid. And Bloodthirst for Gruul, which puts a number of +1/+1 counters on a permanent as an enter the battlefield ability, so long as an opponent has been dealt damage up to that point in the turn.
Because what had happened was in Ravnica, the first set, we didn't quite know the archetypes yet. We did a lot more building based on feel, and then we built the archetypes around it. I think the next group of designers was a little more development oriented. Like Brian Schneider was the head developer at the time. And so what they had done with the way they did it was they figured out the archetype they wanted and then made the mechanic to match the archetype. So they actually did a little bit differently than we had done it in the original Ravnica.
Despite its smaller size, Guildpact boasted more cycles than City of Guilds. Double, in fact, 4 to Ravnica's 2. This includes Rusalkas, 1/1 uncommon spirit creatures that each have an activated ability that includes paying 1 color of its mana and sacrificing the creature. In real life, by the way, the Rusalka have roots in Slavic mythology, and is typically a water-associated feminine entity that is often malicious towards mankind. Getting back to the cycles, there's also Mage Marks, which are auras that give its enchanted creature +1/+1, as well as an additional ability, save for Guardian's Mage Mark, which has Flash instead. Ley Lines, a cycle of powerful rare enchantments that cost 4 mana apiece, but can come into play for free at the start of the game if they're in a player's opening hand. And Nephilim, Magic the Gathering's first ever creatures to have a casting cost of 4 different colors of mana.
So what happened with with the Nephilim was somebody, my guess is like Bill Rose, who's the VP of R&D, said, hey, what happens if people don't like the guilds? And we're like, no, don't like the guilds. And they're like, well, we should make something for people that don't like the guilds. And so I was like, okay, let's do a 4-color cycle. I think we hadn't done a 4-color cycle before. So the whole cycle was to be not normal Ravnica. But yeah, I mean, it was made to be this sort of a quirky, offbeat, different thing. They actually weren't very popular, ironically, when the set came out.
Of course, Guildpact cycles aren't the only cards of note that are in the set. For starters, there's Angel of Despair, a useful utility card in Legacy Reanimator builds, Vintage Icarid decks, and EDH. Burning Tree Shaman can often be found in Legacy Zoo variants, as well as a useful card in modern 8-whack decks. Leyline of the Void, a commonly seen anti-graveyard card in Legacy and Modern. 10th Street Hooligan, an anti-artifact sideboard card most often seen in certain Legacy builds. And Guildpact's 3 Shocklands, Godless Shrine, Steam Vents, and Stopping Ground. The set's pre-release promo is Jin Illuminatus, and its release promo card is Gruul Guildmage. Guildpact also had a pair of notable misprints that made it into the wild. Some copies of the foil version of Thunderheads were printed with the letters Y and W missing from the card's flavor and reminder text, and Hypervolt Grasp was printed with a Gruul watermark rather than the Is It watermark. So is Guildpact amongst your favorite Magic the Gathering sets? If so, let us know in the comments section. Please remember to subscribe to Magic Untapped here on YouTube and toss a buck in our tip jar on Patreon. And finally, a big thank you to Mark Rosewater for sharing his insight with us.